Oh, I can sit down at this place. Look at that. Fancy. Fancy. They really know how to do it here. See? Stand.
You got your water?
A little bit of water. Get started.
Excellent.
Come on in. Come in. Come on in. Enter at your own risk. Okay, so, come on in, you're going the wrong way. I know where they're going. Yeah. So anyway, thank you all for being here. This is so exciting, and I'm so a little overwhelmed, actually. Thank you for coming. This is the first time I'm doing this in public. And I decided that I would read a chapter, a little bit of a chapter here, and then we can have a little discussion. And if you have any questions, of course, we can answer them. And then when I'm through, I'll sign any books that you want me to sign, and we'll see how that goes. And so for those of you who don't know me, I have quite a colorful past, and my book is a chronicle of my entire journey through gender transformation and back. And before I get started, I just want to say a little bit, not to make this anything political at all, but I want to make it clear to anyone that you talk to or anyone that you know that has some issue with the idea of someone who was transgender, retransitioning or detransitioning. Gender is a journey, has been a journey for me, and I've never really considered myself someone who judged people or clocked them for whatever reason. I believe in live and let live, and I think that the world would be a better place if we all practiced that philosophy. So I know that it can be a little bit scary, the idea of someone arriving at a destination of gender and then transitioning back to another gender. But for me, it's been quite a really incredible experience in the fact that sometimes it just takes what it takes to arrive at where you find happiness in your life, and so that being said, I just want to say publicly out loud that this is in no way an anti-transgender book. This is not an anti-transformation book. This is a book about my particular journey, and no one would, any one of you that know me could ever imagine anyone, myself included, as someone who would be like transphobic or anti-trans. I mean, I was a part of that community for almost 15 years. So the idea that this is somehow, an anti-gender book, it's just not. So I just want to make that clear up front before I start. And because I have got that question, and I've done a couple of interviews so far, and that has come up, and I think I need to just say it publicly for myself, so there's no confusion about that. So I'm going to read a chapter tonight, and I'll give you a little preface. It's sort of in the middle of the book. It's kind of a fun chapter. It's chapter 14. The title is called Army Hausfrau. And for some of you that don't know, I was married to a man in the military. And I married him in 1980. This was before same-sex marriage, before any of the rights that we are able to have today became available. And so it was a very different time in history. And I thought it would be interesting to read that. as well. The chapter before has a lot to do with my early relationship with my husband, and unfortunately you'll have to get the book to read about that, because I can't read both. But plenty of books for that. But I will say, prior to this point in my life, I had reached such a pinnacle in my transition that, you know, in my mind, I felt like I had really arrived. I had really, like, I was living the ultimate, you know, what I thought, not anyone else thought for me, but I was living what I thought was the ultimate American dream, to be married to a handsome soldier in the U.S. Army. And, you know, and that was sort of the thing that I grew up, you know, watching movies and television. And, you know, when you were a gender non-conforming kid in those days, you know, you had to pick, you know, a lane. You had to figure out, you know, well, if you're at all feminine, you know, the masculine gays don't really want to be bothered with you. And so if you were at least feminine, you know, there was this idea that, well, maybe being a woman would be better than, you know, being a man. And so that was my mindset of the time. And I'll just go ahead and read that, a little bit of this chapter. Okay. And here we go. So after 5 months of sheer agony, I finally got the go-ahead from Denny to depart to West Germany. I convinced myself that the only reason he married me was to get extra money in his paycheck, and that he had no intention of having me join him. Jealousy fueled my insecurity as I imagined he was involved with someone else, perhaps a woman assigned female at birth. Paranoia proved to be unfounded as the day arrived and my mother and Aunt Connie escorted me to Logan Airport. The drive from Providence with my mother to Boston had proved especially uncomfortable because I had to listen to her constant criticism and complaints the entire way. While things had improved in our relationship, she could still be negative and critical, often letting fear overtake her. She continued to go on and on about how something terrible might happen, and she questioned my decision to go to Germany right up until the very last minute. I believe in her early life that she had been so disappointed in her own marriage to my father that deep down she didn't have much belief that things would work out for me. She often clung to a victim-martyr mentality about things. Even something as simple as getting me somewhere on time could be filled with fraught and anxiety. At one point, I wanted to scream, "Shut the fuck up already." But I didn't. I kept my head in the clouds. At the gate, we awkwardly hugged. Tears trickled down my mom's face as I made my way into the line to the terminal for departure. I couldn't help thinking how far we'd come in our relationship, and I knew her tears were genuine and coming from a place of true concern for her child as she embarked on this new chapter of her young life. Settling into my seat, it finally hit me that this was really happening, and I began to feel overwhelmed and excited about this new phase of my life. The plane began to taxi to the runway, and before I knew it, we were lifting up in the air. The stewardess offered drinks and snacks. I opted for a glass of white wine to take the edge off my anxiety. Opening my purse, I pulled out a little bottle of Valium, which I'd saved for the trip. I'd flown before, but never this far. So it would be ideal if I could sleep most of the way. And asking the stewardess to bring me a blanket, I wrapped myself up and swallowed the pills with the remainder of wine and slowly dozed off. Over the loudspeaker, I heard the captain saying that we would be touching down in Frankfurt soon. Making my way to the restroom, I freshened up a bit. The plum-colored sweater and skirt ensemble I was wearing held up well. Smoothing out my skirt, I pulled it up, reached into my panties to adjust my tuck, which had become loose during the flight. While I was used to it, tucking away my penis was such an unpleasant feeling. And if on a long trip like this, where you're sitting most of the time, it can be especially painful. So I made sure to give myself a little extra room between my legs. Exiting the plane, my anxiety rose like mercury in a thermometer. The sign for customs loomed ahead, and I was confident I looked okay. I never knew how anyone was going to react at first glance. Moving up in the line, a very handsome customs agent asked for my passport. Looked at it, handed it back, and pointed me toward the military area where dependents were to be processed. Soon I saw the army men dressed in their uniforms and armed with weapons. There was no turning back now. This would be the ultimate test of my passing privilege. If I made it through here, I was golden. Another guard reviewed my passport and asked me where I was going. He sized me up like a hungry wolf ready to dine on a fine meal. Obviously pleased with the way I looked in my snug sweater suit. You can head right over there, through that door, miss. That's where the family waiting area is. He smiled, and inside I felt a deep sense of relief and thanked him in the softest and sexiest voice I could muster. Making my way through the swinging doors, I looked around and saw other wives being greeted by their husbands. At first, I didn't see Denny, so I headed toward a bench to wait for him. Psst, looking for me? There he was, looking as handsome as ever, dressed casually in a pullover sweater and jeans. The sweater clung to his arm, showing off his hugely expanded biceps. He had been working out, and his body looked solid and strong as ever. I felt a little tinge of weakness in my knees, knowing soon that we would be together again sexually, as we had been so often before. He held me close and kissed me perfectly. It was as if we were never apart. We chuckled like excited teenagers on their first date, my heart full with knowing that we were together again at last. We collected my suitcases and headed toward a shuttle that would take us to the station to get a train out to our little town outside of Frankfurt. The enormous Frankfurt train station with its high ceilings and imposing structures made me feel like I was entering a scene from Casablanca, with me as Ingrid Bergman and Denny as Humphrey Bogart. Enhancing my fantasy, it couldn't have been more romantic. Arriving at the Schweinfurt station stop, Demi hailed a taxi. "I'm Burgle number 19, he said, in Schweinfurt, bitte," he said to the driver as we sped off to our new home. Clearly my German's not as good as it used to be. We traveled on a winding road not far from the corner, what was the corner of town, and I couldn't help but notice how clean everything was. The streets gleamed in the sun without litter, a leaf or a stray branch in sight. Our apartment building was a large mustard-colored stucco structure with a roof draped in brick-colored clay tiles, and smoke escaping from a few of the stacks above it. It housed 6 apartments total, with our flat on the top floor. It was ideal because I hated anyone above me, and we had a pleasant view of the town. The apartment itself was a good-sized 1-bedroom, which was perfect for us. The funny thing about German houses is that they don't have closets. Instead, they have freestanding cabinets called Wandschrank, or shrunks. The apartment was sparsely furnished in a sleek, somewhat utilitarian style. The apartment tour ended in the bedroom where we made love until we both passed out. I felt safe being in my man's arms. The morning brought many things to attend, and what was most pressing was getting me acclimated to the base on Fort Leadwood. Denny informed me of the procedures for the new dependents arriving from the States. I'd have to get a military ID that allowed me access to all the family services on the base. Going through customs was nothing compared to the fear I had approaching the gatehouse to the barracks. The guard asked me for my passport. I handed it over and smiled as he glanced at it and waved us through. Denny gave me a tour of the base as we walked toward the operations office to get my new photo ID. Confident of my passing privilege, I was always on guard. Confident of my passing privilege, I was always on guard when it came to every aspect of my female identity. I had rehearsed answers for any questions that might arise related to any suspicious aspect of my appearance. For example, if someone commented me on the size of my hands or my feet, I would gleefully respond, "Oh, that's nothing. You should see my brothers. They're gigantic." I was relieved when the photo was taken and I was presented with my U.S. military ID that allowed me access to services for the family members. So shopping at the PX was a surreal experience for me, knowing my situation and having a first-rate view of military family life. The wives and family members all looked the same to me. I felt self-conscious as I knew I didn't. Settling into German life became a little bit easier once I started to find my way around and learn a bit of the language. But married life became routinely boring, and it was long before I became bored with my short-lived domestic bliss. One day, on days when Denny was at work or away for long periods of time, I found it hard to fill my day. There was only so much shopping, cleaning, and cooking a girl could do. I was too fearful of making any friends because the stakes were high if someone found out my not-so-little secret. Improvement arrived in the form of my friendly downstairs neighbor, Berta Kohonen. "Call me Betty for short," she said. Her husband had been an American GI, and she spoke perfect English. Taller and broader than me, her body was strong and full-figured. At 60, she was active and had only a slight limp, and she had a hollow leg, allowing her to drink most men under the table. She released me from the burden of loneliness as I spent hours in her home listening to her regale me of stories from days gone by and tales from her time in the States. She adored me and treated me like a long-lost daughter. My beauty school training finally came in handy as I ended up doing her hair. She would insist on paying me. Our excursions into downtown Schweinfurt to have lunch and some beer at one of her favorite guest houses were frequent and fun. She also had a son who lived in East Berlin, and they didn't have the best relationship. Once a month on payday, Denny would invite a couple of his closest friends over for dinner. I'd prepare some good old-fashioned American cuisine. My meatloaf and mashed potatoes were killer, and the guys loved my cooking. One of his friends, an Italian guy from Brooklyn, was a bit of a flirt and with me behind Denny's back. While I enjoyed the attention, I knew I had to be careful. Whenever I went onto the base, I made sure I was dressed impeccably and looked my best. Men responded to my natural sensuality wherever I went. One sunny day, I was exiting the library with some books. A huge group of GIs had gathered across the road. That day, I was wearing the same outfit I wore on the plane, the one that hugged and accentuated every curve. My neatly set hair fell just below my shoulders and framed my face nicely, and I wasn't heavy into makeup and only wore the basics, a little blush, mascara, and my favorite fire engine red lipstick. Unprepared was I for the sea of green military fatigues of sexy GIs before me as I stepped out into the sunlight. A cacophony of complimentary catcalls and whistles ensued. straightening up my shoulders with a confidence that wasn't hard to muster, I strolled past them with a stride reminiscent of Marilyn Monroe and Niagara. The guys couldn't stand that I was unfazed by their lascivious attention. I love that. You wrote that? I couldn't help thinking to myself they would probably beat me to death if they knew, reminding me of the dangerous life I had chosen to live. I had a close call with one of the other wives. I befriended this Puerto Rican girl from the Bronx. She was sassy and fun to hang out with. And at least she had a little style, unlike so many of the girls who dressed in Kmart couture. Our husbands were away on maneuvers, and she invited me over to overnight at her house. I welcomed her company because I was growing depressed in my army wife role. She lived a short cab ride away, further away from the town in the German countryside. Zulima had a neighbor downstairs who was from Texas with a 5-year-old girl who I swear was Patty McCormick from the Bad Seed. Millie, the girl's mom, was one of those born-again Christian types, plain in appearance and grossly obese. She just couldn't figure out what was different about me, but she sensed the devil, I'm sure. Zulima and I had quite a few laughs at her expense and her ignorance of life in general. Together we all played spades with our husbands. One night, Millie's husband was playing footsie with me under the table. Being the mischievous type that I am, I relished the thought of his Jesus-loving wife finding about what was going on down under. Some nights I stayed over at Zulima's. I had to be very careful about changing in the bathroom. While most women are comfortable naked around each other, it wasn't the same for me. Before bedtime, I locked the bathroom door to shower and slip into my nighties. I would emerge in a cute little cotton baby doll top with matching panties to bed. I climbed into Zulima's bed and we talked a bit before dozing off. But I couldn't help thinking about what a comical moment it was. At that moment, it felt like a scene from Some Like It Hot, minus the sexual tension. Here I was, a married transgender woman in bed with a cisgender married woman who didn't know my assigned birth gender. I imagined the scenarios that most people would think of as I rolled over, smiling to myself about the absurdity of it all. The military includes all dependents and family on evacuation maneuvers. This happens a couple of times per year. I was unlucky that it happened soon after I arrived. Denny was away, but I was still required to attend. His friend Billy gladly drove me to the base. A corn-fed Midwestern boy, Billy was polite, friendly, and wholesomely good-looking. His wife was a petite, nondescript blonde who was very pregnant with their first child. Billy was nice enough to escort me to the evacuation exercise site at a large bunker on base. His wife had already completed it, and she was exempt. The bunker was a hubbub of activity with all types of family members, children, and soldiers milling about. After we were processed, we were instructed to get into our cars and exit the base as if it were a real event. At that moment, the sky opened up, and it began to pour rain. It seemed like an eternity as a line of cars snaked all the way out of Fort Leadwood. Billy reached over me and opened the glove compartment, brushing ever so gently against me. He retrieved a hefty bag of hash. "Looks like we're going to be here for a while," he said, grinning. "Want to smoke a bit?" Naturally, I agreed. And soon the car was filled with smoke. Cracking a window to let some of the smoke escape, he suggested moving to the back since we hadn't moved an inch in what seemed like an eternity. Immediately, I think I knew where this was going. Although I was nervous, I thought, what could really happen? Surrounded by cars, queued up to exit the base. We hopped into the back seat, and within minutes, the rap began. "Oh, you know, Denny's so lucky to have such a beautiful gal like you," he said. I ate it up like candy. Who doesn't like a stream of compliments, especially from a sexy GI? While getting hit on wasn't a rare occurrence, I'd been faithful to Denny while there. It was much too dangerous to fool around with anyone. Billy moved closer as we continued to smoke. He leaned over and placed his hand on my thigh. Uh-oh, I thought. Gently, I moved his hand away, played the married woman card, and said it wouldn't be right. Persisting, as all men do, he landed his hand on my breast and tried to slip it up under my sweater. It was as if we were teenagers on a first date at the drive-in movie. The horny boy trying to hit as many bases as he could. Now, virtue was never my strong point. I couldn't help but be seduced by his sexy advances. I let him caress my breast. He made a beeline for my crotch with his other hand, but I slapped it away forcefully. Pouting, he complied with my request. "We can't do that. I told you that's only for my husband." Imagine how badly this had gone if he persisted. Okay. He was hard and unbuckling his fatigues, proudly displaying his more than average equipment. Like I said, virtue was never my strong point. Stoned and turned on, I made him promise to keep it a secret as I proceeded to take one for the team. The poor guy's wife was knocked up, so I felt it was my duty to provide service for our boys. Happily, he finished, and soon the whole maneuver exercise was complete. I guess it was just a coincidence they called it maneuvers. So I'm going to stop there because this is a really this is a good place to talk a little bit about, the reality of the situation. I've never really considered consequences, and I didn't have that. I never thought of those things. Like I spoke of earlier, I did have some passing privilege, which allowed me to sort of, be comfortable in most situations. But when it came down to it, really, I was still, preoperative. I had not had gender confirmation surgery. And had that gone any other way, I would not be sitting in this stool right now. So, And the thing about, nowadays, you wouldn't think it would be, what's funny about reading this out loud for the first time is that as I'm reading it, I'm picturing the time period and looking at where we are today when it comes to different types of relationships. You have men with, women, and you have transgender women with men, you have transgender with women, you have such a mix of, there's such a huge continuum of gender now, which is so different from what it was like back then. So the idea that back then it would be absurd, today is not, it doesn't hold true. There's no absurdity at all in that. So it's kind of interesting that that popped up for me when I was reading that, because we're so far away from the thinking back then. I think we have so much further to go, but interesting the time period, the history. You have a question? Oh.
I was just wondering if other people.
Oh, okay. And does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yes, I do. What would have happened to Denny had you been found out? Would he have been court-martialed? There might have been some big
Yeah, well, this was during the time, this was even before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That wasn't even on, there were no Clintons. I think this was Reagan, right, Jim, 1980? I think we had Reagan in office, so I can only imagine it would be, court-martialed. There was a movie many years ago called Soldier Boy,
Yes.
where the soldier was killed, was murdered by his bunkmates. I don't know what you call them. What do you call them?
Friends. There was military friends.
Military friends killed him when they found out his lover was a transgender woman. Yeah, Soldier's Boy. It was Jane Fonda's son.
Yeah.
Was in it. It was amazing. He did such a great job. So yeah, he probably would have suffered consequences as well. Yeah.
Brian, I'd like you to talk a little bit about growing up and how you were treated as a sissy boy in a working class community in Rhode Island, and the role that you fell into comfortably.
Well, I write a lot about that time period in the book as well. I grew up in a working class family in Providence, Rhode Island. I was born in Fall River, but I have 5 brothers, and they're all, like I said, they're gigantic. And I'm not little by any means, and physically they were really 6'2", gigantic muscles. And so I fell short physically from them. But also I felt different from them spiritually, because my spirit was different. I had a different essence. I was sensitive and understanding and compassionate and caring, where that was something that didn't come easy to them. They were just brutish, is the best way I can describe them. And I never wanted, and that was one of the things I did not want to be, was what they were. And so I think at an early age, I had rebelled against that idea of masculinity. Like, if that was what masculine was, I didn't want anything to do with it, which in a way was kind of a smart decision when you think about it. But I did have many. There's a lot of trauma in the book. I feel like I should tell you I feel like it should come with a trigger warning, because it's very descriptive about some of the trauma that I experienced as a child, and having written the book and gone back through all of that experience. I was telling a friend earlier before a meeting here at coffee how cathartic it was to reach back and have that experience again with the lens of a mature man who had some sense of how difficult it was to survive something like that. So I gained, if anything, from this a newfound respect of some of the choices that I made, and how I managed to survive them. But there was always this, the other part of your question, Jim, is that there was always this expectation that was put upon me that I was fitting into a certain category, and that's where I should be. Like, in other words, I just basically internalized what everyone was reflecting to me. And because I felt so low about myself, I had zero self-esteem. I was people-pleasing in a way. I was doing what I expected that people wanted me to do. Which was, well, if they thought I was, feminine and pretty, and, I'll make myself more feminine and more pretty, and so that somehow, that message, really instilled with me the idea that there was something wrong about my gender, and that's what started my whole gender transformation journey.
Brian, I had 2 questions. I was curious as to how you did the marriage in 1980. Was it just like a JP? And the other question, not just, but I mean a JP. And you're from Rhode Island. I'm assuming you're Portuguese, Catholic.
Portuguese, yeah.
How did your mom accept your transformation.
Oh my God, that's in here too. Not well.
No.
Not well. No. None of it went very well. Actually, I ran away very young. I started running away when I was 14 years old. I was sleeping in the Fenway in Boston. That's not in the book. I started running away when I was 14, and I would go sleep in the Fenway in Boston and try to hang outside Jocks and the other side, and I don't know. It was almost like a moth to a flame. I just sort of knew that was my tribe, and those were my people, and I don't know how in my 14-year-old brain that I figured that out, but I just ended up in those places. And then, I kept running away and running away. It didn't go well for a very long time, which I write about a lot in the book. It didn't go well. And the marriage thing, I've been told I've been a pushy person. But I would describe it more that I'm sort of, I persevere in spite of, if you tell me no, that inspires me even more. So I kind of had that attitude growing up, because I was always being told no about I couldn't do this, or I couldn't do that, I couldn't do this. So when I met my husband, and we fell in love, and he joined the military, which was one day out of the blue. He comes home, and it's in the book, and guess what? I joined the military, and I'm like, oh, great. So right away, my paranoia thought, well, he's just trying to get rid of me. Excuse me. And I had changed my name legally. This is in 1980. In City Hall, and when I went to City Hall and I changed my name, they gave me a state ID that said my name, Natalia Gervais. That was my name. Natalia Bello was the name I was going by. And it said female in the box. They just handed it over me. So oh, okay. You're saying I'm female. ID. Wedding. Marriage. I got this. And so, my mother used to always say that I had more moves than a clock. And she wasn't kidding, And then, back then I thought, well, I am presenting to be a woman, and I am presenting as female, and everyone calls me she, and that's what I thought I was at the time, and so why not? So I went to City Hall and applied for the marriage license with him, and went to, had to do a blood test, and, before I did the blood test, I called a few friends to see, can they tell from the blood if I'm male or female, and I guess they can't. At least they didn't, if there is a test, they didn't do that when you get married, and I had no STDs, so, I passed that test, and then, I had and I write about that too in the book, because everybody's interested in that whole process of how that happened. And then I sent in my application for a passport, and that came back, because it didn't match. My name didn't match the Social Security number. So I went to the doctor that I was seeing at the time, and I said, look, Dr. So-and-so, I'm getting married, and I'm going to have my surgery, and I'm gonna, I need this. I'm going to Germany to, I'm going to Germany to have my surgery, and I need this letter from you saying that I'm living my life as female. And in 1980, I got the letter from the doctor, notarized. I was, as far as he knew I was living my life as female. No genitalia check or. It's not about that anyway, but that wasn't even something that they asked me, so, yeah.
In New England, that's
in New England.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'm from New England, so I know.
Yeah, Providence. So I'm going to go ahead and read the...
Who performed the wedding?
Oh my God. The wedding was performed by a Catholic priest. And he had no idea. In fact, I'll tell you this, but not outside of this room. He was actually a trick of my husband's. Not in the book. So whenever we needed some extra cash, he'd go see Father so-and-so. So of course when he's, oh, guess what? I'm getting married. Would you like to perform the ceremony? And I had a little wedding. I had his family who did not know. I had my mom was there, my brother. That was it from my family. It was very, I could not risk having any of them at my, so yeah. And the pictures are in here, in the book.
Brian, I'm just trying to understand how you had the courage, given the celebrity that you had gained as a fabulous queen here in New York, involved in nightlife and all that meant in the lifestyle. What made you suddenly say, who am I? And how did you find your way out of that path to another path?
Well, I had, like I was just having this conversation earlier with these two ladies I met in the coffee shop that were lovely enough to come. I had done everything I possibly could to achieve that status. And even though I had worked so hard and I'd done all the things that I did, the surgical things and all of the celebrity and performing and acting, and I acted in plays as playing cisgender roles before, there was even a discussion about a trans woman playing a cisgender role. So I was doing all of that, and every avenue I took, including the wedding, including the marriage, including the relationship, every avenue I went down was a dead end. And on top of that, when you add addiction into the piece, the addiction, I'm in recovery now 32 years, just a few days ago, and when you add in the addiction piece, you're masking all of the things that you don't want to deal with, all of the things that you want to go away that won't go away. And like I said earlier, when people ask me, over the years, people have asked me over and over and again, well, why? And that's why I had to write the book. But the simplest answer is that I was trying to be something that I wasn't, only because I thought other people thought I should be that person. And while I was really successful at it, as successful as any other, trans woman might want to be, it still left me in this incredible state of sadness and pain, and I became suicidal early on in my early recovery. I became very depressed once I stopped using drugs and alcohol, and I really took a deep dive into looking at, what is feminine? What is masculine? I did a lot of work on looking at what are those aspects of my personality, what's important to me, and the answer was that it's important to me to just be able to be both, to be able to be as manly and masculine as I want to, or as feminine and light as I want to. So I really, once I sort of recognize those truths about myself. And there were other factors. That's not just, there were other factors also. Becoming HIV positive in the 80s, was a death sentence for people back then, and not anything like it is now. So that was another factor. When I received my diagnosis from the doctor, the way he delivered it to me scared the shit out of me. I was just like, whoa, if he's treating me like this, imagine what's going to happen going forward. So I was in the real, it's not a simple answer, but I hope that, that people understand that.
It's in the book?
It's in the book, yeah. It's all in the book. Yeah.
When did you first read Jung?
When did I first read Jung?
Yeah.
In college, yeah. When I was young. And humor has helped tremendously. Okay, I'm going to bang the rest of this out for you guys. Do you have a question?
Well, I just wondered if you would talk a little about how you got inspired to write the book, which is not an easy thing to do, and publication, and how all that worked for you.
Well, like I said earlier, people have always, bugged me forever. Like, people have always, and people ask me, I'm great at parties. It's like invite me to any of your parties and you'll be a hit. Because once you start talking about her, it becomes a whole, it's a huge conversation that touches on every imaginable topical subject. So